For decades, the global energy network has operated, well, a lot like the human circulatory system.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it.
Right. It has this steady, kind of invisible pulse. You've got the heart pumping, the arteries carrying the lifeblood, which, in this case is oil and natural gas.
Right.
And the whole body of the global economy just sort of hums along. You don't even think about it on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's a very comforting rhythm. We just inherently assume that when we need it, the energy is always going to be flowing.
Exactly. But based on frontline geopolitical reporting we're looking at from Fox News and the latest economic data out of Al Jazeera, we're currently watching that exact system suffer a massive systemic heart attack in real time.
Yeah, it's really unprecedented.
It is. We are facing an unprecedented global energy shock, and it's all triggered by this escalating conflict in the Middle East. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to trace that shock wave.
Trace it all the way down the line.
Right. We're tracking it from the charred ruins of the world's largest gas hubs, through this, frankly, impossible diplomatic stalemate, right down to the data from global policy trackers at First Post.
And even some really fascinating street-level citizen interviews from Anghat Nederland TV.
Yes, because, this isn't just some abstract story about foreign policy. This is about your grocery bill, your daily commute, and honestly, whether the lights turn on tomorrow morning.
And the symptoms of this shock are spreading incredibly fast. I mean, this is moving far, far beyond the initial impact zone in the Gulf.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because to really grasp the sheer scale of the global panic we're seeing in the markets right now, we have to start at the physical epicenter.
Right, the broken pipes.
Yeah, the actual physical damage that kicked this whole thing off.
Exactly, because, this isn't just some theoretical market panic that's being driven by, Wall Street trading algorithms. This is about critical physical infrastructure being severely degraded.
Right.
What we're really looking at is this massive tit-for-tat military escalation. It basically started when Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, which effectively paralyzed production over there.
And then Iran retaliated.
They did. Iran launched strikes against energy sites across the Gulf. But the most notable target they hit by far was Qatar's Ras Laffan.
And reading through these source reports, Ras Laffan isn't just some random refinery on the coast, is it?
Oh, no. No, it is the crown jewel of global energy. It is literally the largest single site for liquefied natural gas, or LNG, production worldwide.
Oh.
Yeah. The sources indicate that around 14 million tons of yearly capacity was just damaged in that strike.
That's huge.
And to compound that physical damage, Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, which, if you look at a map, is this tiny, narrow waterway that essentially bottlenecks most of the region's sea-based energy exports.
Okay, wait, I want to push back on this for just a second.
Sure.
Because when I picture energy infrastructure, I immediately think of, these massive metal pipelines crossing the desert.
Right, the classic image.
Yeah, and sure, if a missile hits a pipe, it blows a huge hole in it, but can't a country with virtually unlimited resources just, get an engineering crew out there with some heavy machinery, weld a massive steel patch over the crater, reroute the flow, and get it back online in a few weeks? I mean, why is this specific damage to an LNG facility causing such an absolute catastrophic panic?
See, that is the exact assumption most people make, and honestly, it's why the reality is so terrifying. We really have to separate our mental image of oil from our understanding of LNG.
Okay.
Oil is essentially just a thick liquid. You pull it out of the ground, you treat it, you pump it into a massive metal container ship, and you send it across the ocean.
Right.
LNG, liquefied natural gas, is an entirely different beast. It's natural gas. It inherently wants to be a vapor, so to transport it by ship, you have to force it through a liquefaction process.
Which means freezing it, right?
Well, freezing doesn't even begin to cover it. You literally have to cool this gas down to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit.
-2. So
Yeah. You have to cool it that much so it shrinks to 1/600th of its original volume and becomes a liquid. You have to think of an LNG plant not as a pumping station, but as a sprawling, highly pressurized, cryogenic refrigerator the size of a small city.
Oh, wow.
It requires wildly complex, heavy engineering marvels, miles of specialized alloys, intricate compressors, these massive heat exchangers, and then when it finally reaches its destination across the ocean, it requires equally complex regasification facilities to safely turn it back into a vapor so it can actually be burned.
So it's definitely not just a pipe you can weld back together. It's a highly calibrated, pressurized machine.
Precisely. If a facility like Ras Laffan takes a direct missile strike, you don't just patch a hole. The blast wave warps microscopic alignments.
Hmm.
It compromises pressurized cryogenic seals across this massive footprint.
That sounds like a nightmare to fix.
It is. You have to carefully, meticulously diagnose a sprawling network of specialized high-tech components to figure out what exactly is broken before you even think about turning it back on.
Because if you don't...
If you don't, the whole thing could rupture. According to our sources, rebuilding or repairing a damaged LNG facility can actually take longer than building a brand new one from scratch.
Wait, really?
Yeah, simply because diagnosing the damage in that intricate web of complexity takes years, not weeks.
Wow. Okay, so that physical complexity is exactly why the markets are panicking. There is simply no quick fix. You can't just flip a switch and turn the gas back on no matter how much money you throw at the problem.
Exactly. That is the terrifying physical reality that is sinking into the global markets right now.
So with the physical infrastructure burning, and as you said, extremely difficult to fix, attention naturally has to turn to the geopolitical players. I mean, if the pipes are broken, can diplomacy at least reopen the shipping lanes and get whatever energy is left flowing again?
Well, currently the diplomatic chessboard is looking completely deadlocked.
Yeah.
Our sources outline a massive military campaign that is actively underway right now. The U.S. has launched what they're calling Operation Epic Fury.
Epic fury.
Yeah, striking over 10,000 Iranian military targets. According to the Frontline reporting, they've taken out 2/3 of Iran's missile, drone, and naval production capabilities. They even killed a top commander of the IRGC Navy.
Right, and for you listening, the IRGC is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, basically Iran's elite military branch that handles, asymmetric warfare and naval blockades. So the U.S. took out the guy directly responsible for closing the strait.
Exactly. And yet, despite that, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed.
Why?
Because the demands from both sides are just miles apart. And, to be clear, we are just laying out the facts from the diplomatic reporting here. We aren't taking sides. We're just looking at the board as it stands in the sources.
Right, absolutely.
So the U.S. is demanding the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear facilities, absolute zero uranium enrichment going forward, and an end to all proxy support across the region.
Which is obviously a non-starter for Iran.
Right, exactly. And Iran's demands are equally uncompromising in the other direction. They want full sanctions relief, the complete removal of all U.S. military bases from the region, war reparations.
War reparations, wow.
Yeah, and this is a massive one. They want to institute a new payment system where they charge commercial ships up to $2 million just for the right to pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
$2 million per ship.
Yeah.
It's just a complete, utter standstill. Neither side can back down. Though the sources did mention one interesting detail amidst all this fighting. The U.S. actually relaxed sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil that were already out at sea.
Yes, which is a highly calculated move. It's essentially the U.S. trying to prevent a total immediate collapse of the global energy market while the fighting continues. They know they need that oil in the system.
Right.
But this diplomatic deadlock is so severe that geopolitical analysts are starting to look at alternative interventions. For instance, there's the very real possibility of China stepping in.
I saw that in the first post reporting. The idea is that China, who desperately needs this energy themselves, could act as a peacemaker and a security guarantor.
Exactly.
They could send a naval flotilla to escort ships through the strait, and it would allow Iran to save face and essentially say, we trust the Chinese, so we'll let these specific ships through our blockade.
Right, and that would completely rewrite the power dynamic and security architecture of the Middle East overnight.
Yeah.
But then, on the absolute darkest end of the spectrum, our sources also highlighted analysts discussing a nuclear option.
Yeah, this was crazy to read.
The possibility that the U.S. might use a small 5-kiloton atomic bomb to penetrate Iran's deep mountain-based ballistic missile complexes, because conventional bomb busters just can't reach them.
Wait, a 5-kiloton atomic bomb just to blow up in a mountain?
That's what they're floating.
That is, you can't just brush past that. The fact that actual policy analysts are floating the use of a nuclear weapon, even a tactical one, shows how completely desperate and extreme this situation has become.
It is a staggering escalation to even consider, for sure.
Okay, but if we are literally talking about nuclear options and an absolute diplomatic deadlock, how do the countries living right next door survive this? The Gulf states are literally caught in the crossfire.
This is where we get a really fascinating insight into how geopolitics actually works on the ground. The Gulf is deeply divided in how exposed they are to this blockade.
Okay.
Countries that are totally reliant on the Strait of Hormuz to get their exports out, like Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, they are facing steep, immediate economic contractions. Their entire economic lifeblood is just cut off.
But not everyone is totally reliant on that single choke point.
No.
Yeah.
And this is the key insight. True geopolitical power isn't just about weapons. It's about who had the foresight to build a side door 10 years ago. Saudi Arabia and the UAE actually had that foresight. Saudi Arabia built the East-West pipeline, which lets them pump oil all the way across the Arabian Peninsula and export it through the Red Sea. And the UAE built the ADCOP pipeline, moving their crude directly to the Indian Ocean. Both of these routes completely bypass the Strait of Hormuz, so while they are still hurting from the regional instability, they have a lifeline.
And what is their private view on the conflict itself? Do they want a ceasefire?
Well, what's fascinating here is the private stance of these Arab neighbors. According to the diplomatic sources, they actually want the U.S. to finish defanging Iran militarily.
Really?
Yeah. The absolute worst-case scenario for Saudi Arabia and the UAE isn't the current war. It's a scenario where the U.S. stops halfway, declares a ceasefire, and leaves them living next to a wounded, angry, and still highly capable Iran. They want the job finished.
Okay, so the geopolitics are frozen, the physical supply is literally burning,
Yeah.
and because that strait is closed, the shockwave travels straight across the ocean to the region most dependent on that exact shipping lane, Asia.
The vulnerability in Asia is staggering. I mean, Asia receives 80% of the LNG that passes through the Strait of Hormuz.
80%. That is a massive dependency.
It is. And wealthy nations like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan rely almost 100% on imported LNG to keep their economies running. They have some reserves, sure, but they are highly exposed to the supply shock.
But it's the developing nations that are taking the immediate, brutal hit. Our sources noted that countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan are just entirely priced out of the spot market right now.
Right.
And for anyone listening who isn't, an energy trader, the spot market is basically the open market. Imagine you usually buy your energy with a 10-year subscription at a fixed price, but suddenly your supply is cut, and you have to go to a specialized auction house every single morning to bid against wealthy nations like Germany and Japan just to get a single shipment of gas.
And Pakistan simply cannot afford those auction prices.
Exactly. So what do? Pakistan has actually tripled its solar capacity in the last 5 years in a desperate bid to get off the grid and generate their own power.
While other nations are being forced to fire up highly polluting coal plants just to keep the lights on and the hospitals running.
And we are seeing these incredible societal adaptations across the region. The Philippines has instituted a mandatory 4-day work week and ordered government officials to aggressively cut power usage.
And in Thailand, they've outright banned air conditioning in government offices. The news anchors are literally taking off their jackets on live television because it's just too hot in the broadcast studios.
While all this is happening, it's worth noting the sources point out that China is relatively insulated from this specific shock. How did Beijing manage to dodge this?
It's a mix of long-term strategy and geography. Beijing heavily prioritized energy security long before this war ever started. They increased their oil and gas imports by 20% over the last year to build a massive strategic stockpile.
Ah, smart.
Plus, their economy still relies heavily on domestic coal, and crucially, they have overland pipelines coming in from Russia and Central Asia. Those pipes cross land borders, meaning they aren't affected by a naval blockade in the Middle East.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because this shockwave isn't just about electricity and air conditioning. The Al Jazeera economic analysis revealed a hidden global threat that most people completely miss.
Right, the diesel and fertilizer issue.
Yeah, the price of diesel has skyrocketed globally. But more importantly, the supply of urea and nitrogen has completely broken down.
Which is, of course, the foundation of modern agriculture.
Yes. And we have to explain how this works. Because natural gas isn't just the fuel used to run the tractors or power the fertilizer factories.
Right.
The methane in natural gas literally provides the hydrogen molecules needed to synthesize ammonia, which is then turned into urea, which is the nitrogen fertilizer that actually grows the food. If you don't have natural gas, you literally cannot make the fertilizer that feeds the world. The cost of fertilizer has tripled globally.
Which suddenly turns an energy crisis into a catastrophic food crisis.
Exactly. It's not a Jenga tower. It's more like we've built the global economy as this heavily optimized, just-in-time conveyor belt. And someone dropped a wrench into the gears in a cryogenic plant in Qatar. The entire belt snaps, and suddenly A farmer in the American Midwest can't afford to plant his corn crop,
Yeah.
which raises the specter of famine across Africa. Everything is completely intertwined.
It is. And with rolling blackouts threatening to shut down industrial economies and a looming agricultural crisis on the horizon, global governments are absolutely scrambling.
I mean, they have to be.
Right. So if the fertilizer is tripling and the grid is failing, what happens when a prime minister wakes up to this reality? How do they actually stop a total economic collapse by Tuesday?
They desperately pull every policy lever they have. And looking at the global policy tracking from First Post, the toolkit varies wildly depending on where you look. First, you have supply control.
Right. If you don't have enough gas, you dictate exactly who gets to use it. India, for example, invoked rare emergency powers to completely redirect the flow of energy. They told industrial factories they were cut off and forced that gas to be redirected to household kitchens so people could at least cook.
And China banned the export of refined fuel entirely to hoard it inside their borders.
Yep. And Japan authorized its largest ever release of emergency reserves, dumping 15 days' worth of private sector stock into the market.
Then you have price control. This is the government stepping in to hide the true cost from the consumer. Germany literally banned gas stations from changing their prices more than once a day to stop panic buying.
Spain rolled out a €5 billion plan to cut the VAT tax on petrol.
And Taiwan set up a government mechanism to absorb 60% of any wholesale price increase before the consumer ever even sees it on their bill.
But we really have to ask, where does that money come from?
Right.
When a government caps a price, the actual cost of the energy hasn't magically gone down. The government is just paying the difference. They are draining their own sovereign wealth to subsidize the daily commute of their citizens. And when supply and price controls inevitably fail, you get to the most drastic tool, rationing. South Korea is legally restricting cars on the road based on whether they have odd or even license plate numbers.
And Slovenia just became the first EU nation to actively ration fuel at the pump.
But the UK is taking a totally different approach to everyone else, right?
They are. The UK is treating this not as a temporary glitch to be managed, but as a permanent reality. They've mandated that all new homes must be built with electric heat pumps and solar panels. Their message to the public is clear. The only way out of this vulnerability is to permanently shift away from fossil fuel dependency.
It's a bold move.
It is. But looking back at all these wealthy countries subsidizing fuel, Spain, Taiwan, Germany, didn't they already exhaust their emergency budgets doing this exact same thing back during the 2022 energy crunch? How long can they keep this financial charade going?
See, that is the multi-billion-dollar question, and this is the vital insight from the economic data. The 2022 energy crisis didn't fix the system, it just emptied the emergency savings accounts we needed for today. Sovereign balance sheets are incredibly stretched right now. Governments simply do not have the massive reserves of cash they had a few years ago to absorb these new price spikes.
Which means
the inflationary impact this time around is going to be far, far worse. The governments can't afford to hold up the shield anymore. That financial pain is inevitably going to pass directly to the public.
Which brings us perfectly to the human element. Because when the governments run out of money and the shield drops, the burden falls on everyday people. Our sources included some really eye-opening street interviews from ongehoord Nederland TV, exploring exactly how everyday citizens in the Netherlands are reacting to this looming darkness.
The financial strain is incredibly visible there. Gasoline in the Netherlands has hit €2.71 a liter.
That's wild.
People are actively talking about abandoning their central heating entirely this winter and just huddling around small electric space heaters in a single room to survive the cold.
But what really struck me watching those interviews was the wild split in public psychology. You have this one group of citizens who are almost dangerously apathetic. They're shrugging it off on camera, saying, "Oh, I've got solar panels on my roof, my house is well insulated, the crisis won't affect me."
Yeah, and then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have people who are actively prepping for societal breakdown.
Right.
They are stockpiling canned food, hoarding bottled water in their basements, and even ordering raw petroleum online so they have a guaranteed way to cook food when the electrical grid goes down.
And the reality is, the people shrugging it off with their solar panels might not realize how incredibly fragile modern life really is. The interviewees who are prepping pointed out that a rolling blackout isn't just about having a dark living room and reading a book by candlelight.
No, not at all.
If the power drops, the electronic sliding doors at the grocery store won't open. You get trapped in underground parking garages because the gates lock.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Cash registers go dead. meaning you can't buy anything, even if the store is open. The cellular towers eventually fail,
Hmm.
and all the food in your fridge just rots.
And this is where we see a profound psychological shift. For generations, citizens in the developed world have inherently trusted the grid. The social contract was simple.
Hmm.
The state provides the power, you pay your taxes, and you live your life.
Right?
Now, we are seeing a regression where people feel forced to take personal responsibility for their baseline energy needs, like buying a raw petroleum stove just to ensure their family can eat.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this regression is being driven entirely by distant geopolitical events in the Persian Gulf, over which they have absolutely zero control.
It really makes you realize that for so long, energy has been this invisible luxury.
Mm.
We only ever notice it when we flip a switch and nothing happens.
Hmm.
So I want to ask you, the listener, right now, if the power went out this exact second and didn't come back on for a week, how long would your current lifestyle actually last?
It's a very sobering thought experiment.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the massive journey we've just taken through these sources. We started at the fragile, highly pressurized cryogenic LNG hubs in the Gulf, crippled by targeted missile strikes.
Then we move through a deadlocked diplomatic chessboard where the demands are impossible and the threats are literally nuclear.
Right. We tracked the shockwave as it forced Asian nations to ration power and broke the just-in-time conveyor belt of global agriculture. And finally, we watched wealthy governments drain their remaining sovereign wealth, leaving everyday citizens stockpiling petroleum in their basements.
It all highlights a very stark new reality. Energy security is no longer just a theoretical policy debate for politicians in distant capital cities. It is the absolute foundational bedrock of your daily life. It dictates the food you eat, the transport you use, and your fundamental personal security.
Exactly. The circulatory system of the global economy has suffered a massive heart attack, and we are all feeling the lack of oxygen. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder. If global supply chains are this incredibly fragile, what if the ultimate legacy of this crisis isn't just a temporary global recession?
What do you mean?
What if it's the hyper-localization of our world? What if, a decade from now, the true mark of a wealthy neighborhood isn't the square footage of the houses or the luxury cars parked in the driveway, but whether that community owns its own independent, off-grid power supply, forever rewriting the social contract between the citizen and the state?
That is a world that might be closer than we think.
Something to think about the next time you slip that switch. Until next time.